Imagine this. You wake up one morning and the world feels exactly as it did yesterday. The alarm screams. The routine beckons. The obligations stack like stones on your chest. You move through the motions, shower, coffee, commute, but somewhere beneath the surface, a question begins to pulse like a distant drumbeat, quiet but insistent. When did I stop recognizing myself? Now imagine millions of men asking this same question simultaneously, in different languages, different cities, different circumstances, yet all arriving at the same devastating realization. They are not living, they are performing. And the performance has become so seamless, so automatic, that they forgot they were acting at all. This is not a crisis that announces itself with fanfare. There are no protests, no manifestos, no public declarations. Instead, it unfolds as a mass exodus conducted in perfect silence. Men are walking away from relationships that demand everything but offer nothing, from careers that reward productivity but punish humanity, from social circles that expect strength but reject vulnerability. They are disappearing into quiet rooms, distant routines, and internal worlds that the outside refuses to acknowledge or understand. Alan Watts, the philosopher who spent his life unraveling the illusions of modern existence, warned us decades ago that this moment would come. Today, we are witnessing the consequence he predicted. And by the end of this video, you will discover the deepest and most powerful reason behind this phenomenon. The final revelation that may completely change the way you understand yourself and the world around you. But first, think deeply. Have you ever felt a pressure inside your chest like an invisible hand pushing you from all directions? A constant expectation to be strong, to be productive, to be emotionally unshakable, to be the anchor for everyone even when you have no one to anchor you? Why do so many men across different nations, ages, and backgrounds feel this silent fatigue? This internal collapse that few talk about but many experience. If these words resonate with something within you, take a moment to subscribe, leave a like, comment your experiences, and share this message. Your participation not only strengthens this community, but ensures that more people receive insights that may shift their understanding of life, relationships, and human nature. And remember, the final revelation of this video is by far the most important. So stay with me until the end. Here lies the paradox that should stop you cold. How can millions vanish while still remaining visible? How can an entire gender retreat without anyone noticing the departure? The answer is, as unsettling as it is profound, they were never truly seen in the first place. Think about this carefully. When was the last time someone asked a man how he feels rather than what he does? When was the last time his exhaustion was met with compassion rather than the cold command to man up? Society has mastered the art of extracting utility from men while remaining utterly indifferent to their inner lives. They are measured by output, income earned, problems solved, burdens carried, emotions suppressed. Their worth is transactional, their humanity optional. And so they walk away. Not with rage, rage would require an audience. Not with bitterness, bitterness would demand acknowledgement. They walk away with something far more terrifying: acceptance. Acceptance that the world will not change. Acceptance that their pain will not be validated. Acceptance that survival means choosing themselves over the roles that were slowly killing them. Watts spoke of a world so obsessed with doing that it forgot the art of being. A civilization so addicted to noise that it lost the ability to hear the whispers of the soul. He predicted that eventually the human spirit would refuse to participate in its own suffocation. And now, in the quiet withdrawal of millions, we are witnessing that refusal made manifest. But why now? Why this generation? Why this particular moment in history when men who have endured wars, depressions, and revolutions suddenly find the weight unbearable? The answer is not what you think. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is not even exhaustion, though exhaustion plays its part. The answer is something far more dangerous to the status quo: awareness. For the first time in generations, men are waking up to a truth that society desperately needs them to ignore: that the life they were promised, the identity they were assigned, and the sacrifices they were told were noble, are all built on a foundation of lies. This realization does not arrive gently. It comes like a crack in a dam, small at first, barely noticeable, then suddenly catastrophic. One day, a man looks around and sees clearly. The relationship where he is needed but not loved. The career that values him as a resource but not as a person. The friendships maintained through obligation rather than genuine connection. He sees the performance for what it is, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. So he begins to pull back. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly. He stops initiating conversations that are never reciprocated. He stops volunteering for burdens that no one else will share. He stops pretending that the relentless grinding of his spirit is sustainable or normal. He creates distance not out of cruelty, but out of survival. And here is where the great question emerges, the one that will haunt you long after these words fade. If a man's worth is measured only by his utility, what happens when he stops being useful? Does he cease to exist? Or does he finally, for the first time, begin to live? This is not an academic question. It is the lived reality of millions. It is the silent revolution happening in living rooms, offices, and quiet moments of solitude across the globe. And if you have ever felt that invisible hand pressing on your chest, that suffocating expectation to be everything for everyone while being nothing for yourself, then you are already part of this exodus, whether you realize it or not. The question is, what are these men walking toward? And more importantly, what truth are they discovering in the silence that the noise worked so hard to conceal? The answer begins in a place most never think to look, the architecture of identity itself. Long before a man consciously chooses to walk away, something far more insidious has already taken root, a systematic dismantling of his authentic self, brick by brick, year by year, until what remains is not a person, but a function, a role. A machine designed to produce, endure, and serve without complaint. Carl Jung called this the construction of the persona, the mask we wear to meet the demands of society. But Jung warned of something darker. When the mask becomes so rigid, so all-encompassing, that the person wearing it forgets there is a face beneath. For millions of men, this is not a metaphor. It is their lived reality. They have spent so long performing masculinity as society defines it, stoic, unbreakable, emotionally self-sufficient, that they no longer know who they are when the performance stops. Consider this. From childhood, boys are handed a script. Boys don't cry. Be tough. Provide. Protect. Perform. These are not mere phrases. They are commandments that shape neural pathways, emotional responses, and self-concept. Neuroscience reveals that repeated suppression of emotions doesn't eliminate them. It drives them underground, where they fester, creating what psychologists call alexithymia, the inability to identify and express feelings. A man learns to disconnect from his inner world because accessing it has always been punished. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this mechanism centuries ago when he wrote about the slave morality, a system where individuals are conditioned to value their suffering, to see their self-sacrifice as virtue, to mistake endurance for strength. Men are taught that their pain doesn't matter, that voicing it is weakness, that their value lies solely in what they can withstand. And so they withstand, and withstand until one day they can't anymore. But here is what society doesn't tell them. This conditioning serves a purpose. It benefits the systems that rely on male disposability. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that civilization requires certain members to bear disproportionate burdens without acknowledgement: the workers who build but never rest, the soldiers who die but are quickly forgotten, the fathers who provide but remain emotionally invisible. Men have been cast in this role for millennia, and the script hasn't changed. What has changed is their willingness to accept it. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound about human endurance. People can bear almost any suffering if they find meaning in it. But remove the meaning, and even small burdens become unbearable. This is the hidden problem at the heart of male withdrawal. Men are collapsing not because life is hard, they've always known hardship, but because the hardship feels increasingly meaningless. They work jobs that don't fulfill them to afford lives they don't enjoy, maintain relationships where they're valued for utility but not seen as human, and suppress their authentic selves to fit into a masculine ideal that leaves them hollow. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself about one's own freedom, of pretending that choices are inevitable when they are not. For generations, men lived in bad faith, accepting their assigned roles as natural, inevitable, unchangeable. But bad faith eventually cracks. The lie becomes visible. And when it does, The entire structure of a man's life can collapse in an instant of terrible clarity. This is why the exodus feels so sudden to observers. From the outside, it looks like men are inexplicably giving up. But from the inside, it's the culmination of decades of accumulated contradiction. Years of being told they matter while being treated as disposable. Years of being expected to be strong while being denied the support that creates strength. Years of being human while being required to be superhuman. Aldous Huxley warned in Brave New World of a society that would control people not through force but through pleasure and distraction, through conditioning so subtle that people would defend their own oppression. Men today are waking up to realize they've been living in a version of this dystopia, one where they've been conditioned to accept emotional neglect as normal, where they've been taught to pathologize their own needs, where seeking help or expressing vulnerability is reframed as failure. The psychological term for this is learned helplessness, when repeated exposure to unavoidable suffering teaches an organism to stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. But something extraordinary is happening. Men are unlearning this helplessness. They are recognizing that their suffering is not inevitable, that their emotional suppression is not natural, that the roles crushing them are social constructions, not biological destinies. And this recognition, this awakening to the artificial nature of their cage, is what makes their silence so powerful. They are not running from life. They are refusing to participate in a rigged game. They are not abandoning responsibility. They are rejecting false responsibilities that were never theirs to begin with. But awareness alone is not liberation. Understanding the cage doesn't automatically open its door. What happens next, the consequences of this awakening, is where the true depth of this crisis reveals itself. What happens when millions of men simultaneously realize they've been living lives that aren't truly theirs? The answer is not a singular event, but a cascading series of invisible earthquakes, tremors that reshape relationships, families, workplaces, and the very fabric of social connection, yet remain largely unnoticed because they occur in the hidden depths of individual consciousness. The first consequence is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The mental anguish that occurs when your beliefs clash violently with your reality. A man who has spent decades believing that sacrifice equals love, that silence equals strength, that endurance equals masculinity, suddenly confronts evidence that these equations are false. His sacrifice went unappreciated. His silence was mistaken for indifference. His endurance left him empty. The dissonance is unbearable, and the brain, desperate to resolve this conflict, offers two paths: change your reality or change your beliefs. Most men choose the former. They begin withdrawing not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. They become what researchers call present but absent, physically occupying spaces while mentally and emotionally disengaging. They sit at dinner tables without truly being there. They go to work but invest nothing beyond the minimum. They remain in relationships but stop fighting for them. Stop hoping for them. Stop believing in them. This is not apathy. This is strategic emotional withdrawal, a survival mechanism to protect what little remains of the self. But here lies the tragedy that society refuses to acknowledge. This withdrawal is often misinterpreted as the problem rather than the symptom. The man who stops initiating conversations is labeled as distant. The man who sets boundaries is called selfish. The man who refuses to carry everyone else's emotional burdens is accused of not caring. The very act of self-preservation is pathologized, turned into evidence of his inadequacy, which only deepens his conviction that walking away was the right choice. Neuroscience reveals something devastating about prolonged emotional suppression. It doesn't just affect the mind, it rewires the brain. Chronic stress and emotional neglect shrink the hippocampus, impair the prefrontal cortex, and keep the amygdala in a state of hypervigilance. In simpler terms, years of unacknowledged suffering physically alter a man's ability to regulate emotions, process experiences, and connect with others. By the time he walks away, he's not just emotionally exhausted, he's neurologically compromised. His capacity for trust, intimacy, and vulnerability has been systematically eroded. This leads to the second unseen consequence: the proliferation of what sociologists call proto-communities, groups of isolated individuals who share an experience but never truly connect. Online forums, silent solidarity, parallel journeys of withdrawal that never intersect. Men walking away discover they are not alone in their exodus, yet they remain profoundly lonely within it. They find validation in knowing others feel the same. But this validation doesn't heal the wound. It only confirms its universality. Consider the confirmation bias at play here. Once a man begins to see the patterns, the one-sided emotional labor, the conditional love, the transactional relationships, he begins to see them everywhere. Every interaction becomes filtered through this new lens. A friend's casual dismissal of his feelings, once overlooked, now feels like betrayal. A partner's expectation that he suppress his needs, once normalized, now feels unbearable. The workplace's demand for constant availability, once accepted, now feels exploitative. The bias isn't creating false patterns, it's revealing patterns that were always there but were invisible because he was conditioned not to see them. This creates a feedback loop. The more he sees, the more he withdraws. The more he withdraws, the more his relationships deteriorate. The more they deteriorate, the more evidence he accumulates that withdrawal was justified. And the cycle continues, pulling him further into isolation, yet simultaneously affirming his choice to isolate. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is what happens to the men who don't walk away, those who recognize the cage but lack the courage or resources to leave it. They remain trapped in a state of perpetual resentment, watching others escape while they continue to perform. This breeds a quiet bitterness that poisons everything it touches. They become hollow men, going through motions devoid of meaning, air spirits eroding incrementally until nothing authentic remains. These men are the walking, wounded casualties of a system that demands their compliance but offers nothing in return. Cultural conditioning makes this worse. The sunk cost fallacy keeps men invested in situations that destroy them. I've already sacrificed so much. If I walk away now, it will all have been for nothing. But this logic is a trap. Continuing to invest in something harmful doesn't validate past sacrifices, it compounds them. Yet the psychological pull is immense. To walk away is to admit that years, perhaps decades, were spent living a lie. That admission requires a kind of courage most people never develop. Meanwhile, society continues to demand explanations. Why are men checking out? What's wrong with this generation? Why can't they just handle responsibility like men used to? These questions reveal a fundamental misunderstanding. Men aren't rejecting responsibility. They're rejecting a definition of responsibility that requires their self-destruction. They're not walking away from strength, they're walking toward a version of strength that doesn't equate with silent suffering. The consequence that terrifies the establishment most is this: men are beginning to question everything. If the masculine script they were handed is false, what else is false? If their worth isn't tied to productivity, what is it tied to? If emotional suppression isn't strength, what is? These questions threaten the entire social order because they strike at assumptions that keep systems functioning. A man who refuses to sacrifice himself for a society that doesn't value him is a man who has become ungovernable. And this is where the true crisis emerges. Not in the walking away itself, but in what it represents, the beginning of a mass awakening that cannot be reversed, controlled, or suppressed. The rebellion begins not with grand gestures, but with a single radical act, telling yourself the truth. Not the truth others need you to believe. Not the truth that makes your suffering noble or your sacrifice meaningful. The raw, unvarnished truth about what your life has become and what it has cost you. This is where freedom starts, in the uncomfortable, often devastating moment when you stop lying to yourself. Alan Watts spoke of the great liberation that comes from realizing you are not who you thought you were. The roles you've played, provider, protector, emotional rock, tireless worker, these are costumes, not your essence. Beneath them lies something society has worked tirelessly to make you forget. A human being with needs, desires, vulnerabilities, and a right to exist beyond utility. The first step in breaking free is remembering this forgotten self. But how does one rebel against conditioning so deeply embedded it feels like nature itself? The answer lies in what Watts called the wisdom of insecurity. The counterintuitive realization that true strength comes not from certainty and control, but from accepting uncertainty and releasing control. For men who have been taught that their value depends on having answers, being unshakable, and maintaining control, this represents a complete inversion of everything they know. Start here. Give yourself permission to not know, permission to be uncertain, permission to admit that the path you're on might be wrong, that the life you've built might not be yours, that the person you've become might be a stranger you no longer recognize. This permission is revolutionary because it contradicts the masculine imperative to always have your life together, to always know what you're doing, to never appear lost or confused. The Stoic philosophers Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca understood something profound. You cannot control external circumstances, but you can control your response to them. For too long, men have tried to control the uncontrollable other people's feelings, societal expectations, outcomes beyond their influence. This creates perpetual exhaustion. The rebellion involves a radical shift, releasing what you cannot control and reclaiming what you can. Your time, your energy, your emotional investment, your presence. This means learning to say no. Not aggressively, not defensively, but firmly and without justification. No, I cannot take on that extra project. No, I cannot be your emotional support while receiving none in return. No, I cannot continue pretending I'm fine when I'm not. Each no is a small act of reclamation, taking back pieces of yourself you've given away under duress. History offers us examples of those who walk this path. Henry David Thoreau withdrew to Walden Pond not because he hated society, but because he needed to discover what life felt like when stripped of society's demands. He wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." His experiment wasn't about permanent isolation. It was about temporary separation to gain clarity. Many men walking away today are engaged in their own version of this experiment. The rebellion also requires confronting what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to attribute others' behavior to their character, while attributing your own behavior to circumstances. You've been conditioned to see your struggles as personal failures rather than reasonable responses to unreasonable situations. The truth? Your exhaustion isn't weakness, it's evidence you've been carrying too much for too long. Your desire to withdraw isn't selfishness, it's your psyche protecting itself from collapse. Your silence isn't inadequacy, it's wisdom recognizing that some battles aren't worth fighting. Breaking free means rebuilding from a new foundation, not the foundation society handed you, the one built on sacrifice, suppression, and service, but one you construct yourself, stone by stone, based on authenticity. Ask yourself, what do I actually want? Not what should I want, not what would make others happy. Not what would prove my worth. What do I genuinely desire when I strip away all the conditioning? For many men, this question produces a terrifying silence. They've spent so long focused on what others need that they've become strangers to their own desires. The rebellion involves sitting with this silence, allowing it to gradually fill with answers that emerge not from obligation but from genuine interest, curiosity, and passion. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are. The rebellion is the refusal to participate in this despair any longer. It's choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, self-preservation over self-destruction. It means accepting that some people will call you selfish, and recognizing that selfish often means unwilling to destroy yourself for my benefit." The practical steps are deceptively simple. Create space, physical, temporal, emotional, where you answer to no one. Reconnect with forgotten interests, hobbies, and passions that were shelved because responsible men don't have time for that. Seek out environments and relationships where your humanity is valued, not just your utility. And most radically, stop performing. Stop pretending you're okay when you're not. Stop hiding your struggles to spare others discomfort. Stop acting as if your needs don't exist. This rebellion isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming yourself, the person you were before the world told you who to be. It's about recovery, not reinvention. Archaeology, not architecture. Uncovering, rather than constructing. And here's what they won't tell you. The moment you truly begin this process, the moment you stop living for external validation and start living from internal truth, something extraordinary happens. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, persistently, undeniably, you begin to feel alive again. Not productive, not useful, not valuable to others. Alive, present, real. This is the rebellion that changes everything. Not a rebellion against the world, but a rebellion on behalf of yourself, the self that has been waiting, patient, and persistent. for you to remember it exists. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean at twilight. The sky bleeds into the water, erasing the boundary between earth and heaven. And in this liminal space, you realize something that sends a shiver through your entire being. You were never meant to carry the weight of the world. You were never designed to be invincible. You were never supposed to be a machine. You are, and have always been, profoundly, vulnerably, magnificently human. This is the ultimate truth that millions of men are discovering in their silence, the revelation that redefines everything, that makes every past struggle suddenly comprehensible, that transforms withdrawal from defeat into awakening. The truth is this: the system that demanded your self-destruction was never designed for your benefit. Your refusal to continue destroying yourself is not failure. It is the first act of genuine self-love you may have ever committed. Alan Watts spent his life pointing toward this realization. He spoke of the great cosmic joke that we are taught to seek externally what can only be found internally, to chase futures while ignoring the present, to become something we imagine we should be while rejecting what we already are. For men, this joke has a particularly cruel punchline. You've been conditioned to believe your worth must be earned, proven, and constantly demonstrated through sacrifice. But worth that must be earned isn't worth at all its wage. And you are not an employee of existence. You are existence itself, temporarily taking human form. Let this sink in completely. You do not need to justify your existence through productivity. You do not need to purchase love through self-sacrifice. You do not need to earn your right to have needs, express emotions, or take up space in the world. These rights are inherent, inalienable, yours by virtue of being alive. Every moment you've spent believing otherwise was a moment spent under a delusion, a culturally sanctioned delusion, but a delusion nonetheless. Carl Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you were conditioned to be, is not optional. It's inevitable. The only question is whether you will participate consciously or whether life will force the process upon you through crisis, breakdown, or the slow erosion of spirit. The men walking away have chosen conscious participation. They've decided that an intentional unraveling is preferable to an involuntary collapse. But here's where the revelation deepens into something even more profound. This journey you've been on, the performance, the suppression, the exhaustion, was never meaningless. It taught you something invaluable. It showed you exactly what you are not. And in a strange, paradoxical way, years of living falsely have prepared you to finally live truthfully. Your suffering wasn't purposeless. It was the crucible that burned away illusions, leaving only what's real. Viktor Frankl discovered in the concentration camps that suffering without meaning is unbearable, but suffering with meaning can be transcended. The meaning you can now assign to your past struggles is this: they were the price of awakening. Every moment of silent endurance, every swallowed emotion, every sacrifice that went unacknowledged, these were not wastes. They were lessons teaching you what authentic living is not, so you could finally recognize what authentic living is. And what is authentic living? It is astonishingly simple, yet radical in its implications. Living in accordance with your actual nature, rather than your assigned role. It means honoring your need for rest, for connection, for emotional expression, for solitude, for meaning, for play, for beauty, for depth. It means treating yourself with the same compassion you've extended to everyone else. It means recognizing that you are not here to be consumed by others, but to experience existence from your unique vantage point. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote in Letters to a Young Poet, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. The dragon you've been fleeing, this terror of being inadequate, of being too much or not enough, of failing at manhood, is not your enemy. It's the part of you that was never allowed to be loved, accepted, or acknowledged. Your silence, your withdrawal, your rebellion, these are acts of finally offering that unloved part the recognition it has always deserved. This realization carries seismic implications. It means that everyone who called you weak for having limits was wrong. Everyone who demanded you suppress yourself for their comfort was asking you to betray yourself. Every system that measured your value by your utility was dehumanizing you. And every moment you complied, you were participating in your own diminishment, not out of weakness, but out of a misguided belief that this was the price of being good, responsible, masculine. But masculinity, true masculinity, has nothing to do with self-destruction. Real strength is not the capacity to endure suffering silently, it's the wisdom to refuse unnecessary suffering. Real courage is not suppressing vulnerability, it's expressing vulnerability despite the risk. Real responsibility is not sacrificing yourself for others, it's maintaining yourself so you can genuinely contribute rather than merely comply. The men walking away are not retreating from masculinity, they're rediscovering it. They're finding a version of manhood that doesn't require them to be less human. They're constructing an identity based not on what they can endure, but on who they actually are. And in this reconstruction, they're discovering something revolutionary, that they have permission to be whole. Wholeness. This is the ultimate destination, not perfection, not invulnerability, not the stoic ideal of being unmoved by life. Wholeness, which includes strength and weakness, certainty and doubt, resilience and fragility, independence and need. Wholeness means integrating all the parts of yourself that you were told to exile, amputate, or deny. It means becoming complete rather than simply becoming acceptable. And here is the final, deepest truth, the one that makes everything else make sense. You were always whole. The fracturing, the incompleteness, the sense that something essential was missing, these were not natural states. They were injuries inflicted by a society that needed you broken into manageable pieces. Your wholeness was always there, buried beneath expectations, waiting for you to excavate it. The silence you've chosen, the space you've created, the walking away, these are the excavation. Watts would tell you that the you who feels broken and the you who observes that brokenness are not the same. The observer, that awareness, watching your thoughts, your pain, your struggles, is untouched by any of it. It is the part of you that has been there since birth, watching the construction of the false self, the performance of the persona, and now, watching its dissolution. That observer is your true self. And it was never damaged. It was only obscured. So what does this mean for your life right now, in this moment? It means you can stop. Stop performing. Stop pretending. Stop carrying weights that were never yours. Stop earning what should be freely given. Stop proving what needs no proof. You can simply be not as a cop-out or laziness, but as a radical act of presence. Being is not passive. It's the most active choice you can make in a world that demands you constantly do. The ultimate realization is this: the moment you stop trying to be what others need and allow yourself to be what you are, you don't lose yourself, you find yourself. The moment you stop running from your humanity, you discover it's not weakness, but the source of all genuine strength. The moment you choose yourself, not from selfishness, but from self-preservation, you don't abandon the world. You finally, for the first time, have something real to offer it. This is why millions are walking away. Not because they're giving up on life, but because they're refusing to give up on themselves. Not because they're weak, but because they've finally become strong enough to stop pretending. Not because they hate the world, but because they've remembered that they, too, are part of the world and deserve the same care, attention, and compassion they've extended to everyone else. The silence is not an ending. It's a beginning. The withdrawal is not a retreat. It's a return to the self you were before the world taught you to be someone else. And that self, patient and persistent, has been waiting for this moment your entire life. So, if you recognize yourself in these words, if you feel the weight lifting even slightly as you read them, if something deep inside whispers, "Yes, this is true," then you already know what you need to do. Not dramatic gestures, not radical upheaval, just small, steady steps back toward yourself. Permission to rest, permission to feel, permission to be human. And in that permission, you will find what you've been searching for all along. Not happiness, not success, not validation from others, but something far more valuable. Peace. The quiet, unshakable peace that comes from, finally, after years of exile, coming home to yourself. This is the final revelation. This is the truth that changes everything. You were never the problem. The system that demanded your diminishment was the problem. And your refusal to continue diminishing yourself is not selfishness, it's sanity. It's wisdom. It's the most loving thing you could possibly do. Not just for yourself, but for everyone whose life you touch. Because a man who has found himself can finally offer something genuine to the world. Not his utility, not his performance, but his presence, his truth, his whole, integrated, fully human self. And that is worth walking away for.